still stay on the Star Wars side, but I take a little bit of umbrage with something you wrote
What's up?
with your op-ed, which it's awesome you did an op-ed for, what is this, .esports. So
Esports,
actually, if you don't mind, I know you write for Clownfish.
Mhm.
How did this develop with .esports now? Because now you're doing a little bit more than Clownfish. And what do you do on Clownfish? Reviews, or do you do more on that?
I do a lot more than that. I wear many
Okay.
hats with Clownfish. I do reviews, I do news, I do
Okay.
op-eds, features and stuff. What I do on Dot is almost as much
Okay.
because I do features on Dot when I pitch them, which is what I pitch that. But I also do guides and also news as well.
Okay. So that's awesome. Now you're doing .esports and whatnot. I love, this is your first, if I'm saying this correctly, your first op-ed for Star Wars.
For on an official website, yes. It's not the first op-ed for
Yes.
Star Wars I've ever written, because I've written many others, and some of them,
Yes.
they're then you can't find them so much on the internet anymore because websites changing and stuff. But this was the first one that I did on a much larger outlet that I did like that,
Okay.
that I had to pitch and stuff.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying. And this is a great op-ed. I actually, I take umbrage with it. Not that it's wrong. I think everything you say in here is actually extremely fair and accurate and is right. So the op-ed, is Outlaws really the first open world Star Wars game?
Yeah.
In your words, how would you answer that question? Do you think it is?
I would say yes. And it's because the biggest reason, one of the big things behind it and my motivation behind it is because Star Wars fans and even gamers to an extent, we can't all agree on what an actual open world game is and what the actual criteria and standard is for what is considered an open world game. I think it's constantly changing amongst people, and there's never a fair kind of like goalpost for a game to be classified as that, because I think a lot of games that, and some of the ones I pointed out to in the op-ed, was that there's a lot of games that are brought up by the Star Wars fandom that are not necessarily or not true open world games. They have what's called open world elements to them, which is parts of what an open world or what would make up an open world game, but they're not open world games by classification.
I love what you say about Black Ops 3 being an RPG. That wouldn't really make sense, but it has those elements in it. Reason I take umbrage with it is you're right. You're completely right about it, except it's not, if we're getting down to semantics here, because it's kind of what you're saying, the semantics of people saying, well, what even is open world? Well, there's multiple worlds in this. It's an open galaxy game. That's what it is. That's
the problem, though. It's like, again, just because it's open galaxy by design, when you look at it just from a game design perspective, that is essentially open world. If there was a certain criteria, then that was one of the biggest things I had to do with that feature. Is I had to define, okay, what can constitute an open world game? Because once you have that, then we could go and discuss everything else and really kind of try to break it down. And the biggest things, I'm telling you, I had to do not only a lot of research for it, but I also had to go back and forth with the editors at Esports, because sometimes, even though I feel I had a very strong argument and stuff, they would say, like, look, maybe you're describing a sandbox game, which is an entirely different thing, which is not the same as open world, which is what a lot of these games that get brought up end up becoming when you classify them. The other ones, too, is that some of the reasoning and some of the examples I tried to bring up, some of the editors personally didn't agree with it, even though I was right by actually supporting all the info and stuff, because even they had their own personal views on what is what when it comes to what an open world game is, what a sandbox game is, what constitutes the criteria for fulfilling that. And I had to be the one who's like, look, okay, for the sake of this op-ed, this is what it is. Because this is based on not only past games that have been released over the years, not Star Wars and non-Star Wars, but also what developers have said over the years too. One of the biggest ones most recently that everybody brings up now because of, it being so popular, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. That was a question that was asked to the devs straight up, and they said no. They don't consider their game to be open world. And when you look at it in the same way that I was breaking everything down, it totally makes sense why they would say that.
Yeah, you mentioned in it, you bring up Lego Star Wars: The Skywalker Saga. I think that would be a good choice if you were to say, oh, what is the first open world Star Wars game? That would be a good choice, but like you say, it is very level-based as well, which I think that kind of takes away from it.
There's another thing
designed
too. There's another thing too that takes away from it too, which is like, here, I'll even tell everybody now. It's like, if they haven't read the op-ed, I mean, go read it. But this is like some of the criteria I said what makes an open world game. not only do you have to have a lot of space to explore, to look around, explore, and be rewarded for that exploration, but you also have to have a dynamic environment. A dynamic environment means that it's not just stuff that's placed in there, it's stuff that's placed in there that interacts with itself that also changes. So, perfect example of that would be games like Horizon Zero Dawn or Forbidden West, games like Grand Theft Auto, games like No Man's Sky, that fulfill that, where you have all this space. You could go explore, you could find subquests, you could find other like hidden goodies, like all this other stuff, but also you could just sit back and watch the world interact with itself, and just completely just, do its own thing. And then finally, at least for me, not be limited to with your exploration and your freedom by story progression, where the narrative could be there, but the narrative isn't what dictates what you are allowed to do within that world. And for me, for games like Jedi Survivor, for games like Lego Star Wars, for games like Star Wars Galaxies, for games like I'm trying to think off the top of my head, Knights of the Old Republic,
Knights of the Old Republic.
Knights of the Old Republic. All those games, what they have in common is that their narrative dictates how much you could actually move around and explore and actually have enough freedom to do what you want. It's not so much just the space that you have. It has to be all those things that I mentioned working together in tandem consistently throughout the experience. The only caveat with that, which is what I went back and forth with the editors over there, and even other people got mad because I said this. With games like Grand Theft Auto has the islands. Okay, what that's really a cause of, really, it's not so much the progression trying to limit you. That's actually a limitation of the hardware that they were made on for a while. Specifically, Grand Theft Auto 3, Grand Theft Auto Vice City, games like that, where the game can only render so much like that, and it has to prevent you from going further before things can progress and stuff with the story or whatnot. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but that's at least where I felt like this could be a fair assessment of like how to tackle that type of topic, especially when nobody else really agrees on it.
Yeah, and I'm just messing. I think it's a great op-ed, and that last point right there really, once I kind of understood that, it made sense to me, because I was thinking Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, they're open world games, but actually they're more of Metroidvania type of games.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, where it is open, it's open area, or maybe even designed to be an open world, but the progression is locked behind story elements that you later have to come back.
Funny enough, you should say that,
to.
because again, this is something the devs were asked directly. I believe it was either an IGN interview or some other interview by either Game Informer or Kotaku at some point. But this was a while back before the game came out, and so they were asked about that. And really, they kind of like classify it, or at least they describe it as like an action RPG or an action platformer. Because really, there's not really a lot of RPG elements to it, other than
I thought it was a platformer.
Yeah, it's really an action
yeah.
platformer. It's the same way that you look at Dark Souls. Dark Souls is really an action game, an action platformer, even though it has heavy RPG elements in it, on top of like the worlds. Elden Ring is one that I feel like is a good one that you could make a stronger argument for it being an open world. But again, it still falls into that same thing where a lot of the stuff in that world is not interacting with itself. It's just kind of placed there. And the same thing in Jedi Survivor. When you're in I forgot the world's name, but in the main worlds where you have the cantina, right? And you're going around exploring the areas outside in the fields like that. I think it's Kobo. Kobo is the word.
Kobo,
right? Yeah. When you're exploring Kobo, right? And you see some of the troops walking around and stuff, those troops are not always interacting with the other things around them, not with the droids, with the animals and stuff.
Path,
They sometimes do when they come into contact and stuff, but like you can't just go out into the fields and then have different dynamic, interactions between those things. Like, it would be awesome if it did. That'd be amazing. But the game wasn't designed like that. Like, you could still go onto the field and find those same groups of troopers every time you use a meditation point in the exact same location, the exact same spots where they start and stop and what they run into and stuff. It's not dynamic. It's kind of scripted almost.
So you mentioned these RPG games, because RPGs, they have a lot of other elements in them. It could be open world RPG, action RPG, platformer RPG, I guess a shooter RPG.
Yeah.
So a giant RPG.
Galaxies. Galaxies, really.
Knights of the Republic, Galaxies. I actually never played Galaxies. But yeah, you're right. Outlaws has the opportunity to be the first open world Star Wars game, which it will be, as far as we know, unless another game comes out of nowhere. But Outlaws, I think, will end up being my most anticipated game ever, or at least top 3. I'm extremely excited for it. The information that's been coming out, you can like in the old Battlefront games, you could take off, go into space, fly wherever you want. I mean, it's almost a sandbox.
You literally go from ground to space seamlessly, which is awesome.
I absolutely cannot wait for it. So it's Star Wars. It's the gift that never stops giving. It never does. No matter where you're at in pop culture, Star Wars will be there.